The ancient cast-iron stove stood like a monument in the corner of Sarah's sweet emporium, its broken door hanging crooked like a scar that refused to heal. When Jack pushed through the door that April morning, the bell jingling above his head, he didn't recognize the woman standing behind the counter with flour-dusted hands. But Lord have mercy, she recognized him. 7 years had bent his once proud shoulders, hollowed his cheeks like drought does a creek bed. When their eyes met across that shining store, filled with the smell of her famous peach cobbler, Jack Thompson fell to his knees right there on her polished floor, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. Too late, he understood what he'd thrown away when he'd abandoned her with nothing but that old stove, and his cruel words echoing in the Kentucky hills. The August sun beat down something fierce on Sarah Thompson's back as she stood in the yard of what was supposed to be their new beginning. Sweat trickled between her shoulder blades, her cotton dress sticking to her 7 months pregnant belly like a second skin. The old cabin before her looked more broken than promised, its porch sagging in the middle like it was tired of standing, windows cloudy with decades of Kentucky dust. "This ain't what you said, Jack," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking like a leaf in October wind. "You said it was a proper house." Jack Thompson lit a cigarette, the smoke curling around his handsome face that now wore a look colder than well. "Water in January. It's got 4 walls and a roof, don't it?" he drawled, not even bothering to look her in the eye. "Ain't like you deserve the governor's mansion." Sarah's hand went protective-like to her swollen belly, feeling the baby kicking. Inside, strong and determined unlike her own faltering heart. The moving truck that had carried their few possessions from their rented farmhouse was already disappearing down the dirt road, leaving only dust and broken promises in its wake. "Where's our furniture?" "Our bed?" Sarah asked, her throat tight as a mason jar lid. "Jack, where's all our things?" Jack took a long drag from his cigarette, then flicked it into the overgrown yard. "Sold 'em," he said, flat as day. "Got better use for that money than wasting it on this place." "You sold our things." Sarah couldn't make sense of the words, like they were in some foreign tongue. "But where am I supposed to sleep? How am I supposed to cook?" Her voice was rising now, panic fluttering in her chest like a trapped bird. "Figure it out," Jack said, jingling his truck keys in his pocket. "Always complaining. That's your problem, Sarah. Never satisfied with nothing." The cabin door hung crooked on its hinges, and when Sarah pushed it open, the smell of mildew and forgotten dreams nearbout knocked her over. Inside was emptier than a church on Super Bowl Sunday. Nothing but dust, mouse droppings, and a broken-down cast-iron stove sitting in the corner like some kind of cruel joke. "There's your cooking setup," Jack said, nodding toward the stove. "Reckon it still works if you clean it up. Might need some parts." Sarah felt the world tilting beneath her feet. 7 months pregnant, middle of nowhere, and now this. "Jack, please," she said, hating the whine that had crept into her voice. "I can't stay here like this. There's nothing. There's not even running water." "Well, pump out back still works. Checked it myself." Jack's eyes wouldn't meet hers, fixed on something out the window. "Look, I gotta run into town, get some business sorted. When will you be back?" Sarah asked, knowing deep down what the answer would be before he even opened his mouth. Jack's face hardened like cement setting. "Thing is, Sarah, I ain't coming back." The words hung in the stifling air between them, heavy as storm clouds. Sarah felt her knees go weak, grabbing onto the doorframe to keep from falling. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "This ain't working," Jack said, finally looking at her, his blue eyes colder than she'd ever seen them. "You, me, the baby. Coming? I never asked for any of it, been thinking on it a while now. But we're married, 7 years, Jack." Sarah's voice broke like a twig underfoot. "And the baby, our baby, your baby," he corrected, cruel as frost on tender spring buds. "You're the one wanted it so bad." Sarah felt the baby kick again, like it was protesting his daddy's words. "You can't mean this, you're just scared about being a father." "That's natural, my mama said all men get—" "Stop it!" Jack's voice cracked like summer thunder. "Always trying to fix things with your sweet talk and your understanding. Look around you, Sarah. This is all you're worth to me. An old broken cabin. With an old broken stove." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over like a creek after spring thaw. "Jack, don't do this. Please don't leave us here." Jack was already halfway to his truck. "How wanted a home so bad," he called over his shoulder. "Well, here it is. Ain't much, but it suits you. Old, useless, and good for nothing but taking up space." "Jack," Sarah cried, waddling as fast as her pregnant body would allow across the uneven ground. "You can't just leave me here. I ain't got no car, no phone." He was in the truck now, engine roaring to life. The window rolled down, and for one wild moment, Sarah thought he was having a change of heart. Then he tossed something out, her old pocketbook, landing with a soft thud in the dirt at her feet. Left you $20 in your ID. More generous considering. His eyes traveled over her swollen body with disgust. All you do is eat anyway, getting bigger by the day. The truck was already moving, kicking up dust that stung Sarah's eyes, or maybe it was just the tears falling hot and heavy now. She stood there in that forsaken yard, one hand on her belly, the other clutching her worn pocketbook, watching the only man she'd ever loved drive away like she meant no more to him than yesterday's newspaper. The silence that fell after the sound of his truck faded was the loudest thing Sarah Thompson had ever heard. A mockingbird called from a nearby tree, and somewhere in the woods a woodpecker tapped out a rhythm like a heartbeat. Sarah sank down right there in the dirt, her legs just giving out beneath the weight of her new reality. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered to her unborn child, her voice breaking on every word. "Just you and me against the world." The old stove sat waiting in that empty cabin, its broken door hanging open like a mouth frozen mid-laugh at her misfortune. Sarah didn't know it then, but that old cast-iron monster meant as her prison would someday become the foundation of her freedom. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the yard, Sarah Thompson sat in the dirt of what was now, God help her, home. Tomorrow she'd allow herself to fall apart, but right now, with the baby moving restless inside her, she made a promise. "We're gonna be all right," she whispered fiercely, as if saying it out loud might make it true. "You hear me, little one? Mama's gonna make sure we're all right." But Lord have mercy, she had no earthly idea how. Sarah Thompson spent that first night on the bare wooden floor of the cabin, her pregnant body aching something awful with each shift and turn. The Kentucky summer night was hot as the devil's kitchen, but she shivered all the same, fear having a way of chilling a body from the inside out. Come morning, Sarah forced herself up, her back complaining, and her spirit bruised, but not yet broken. She made her way to the old well Jack had mentioned, praying it wasn't as neglected as everything else. The pump handle creaked like an old man's joints, but sure enough, water came gushing out, rust-colored at first, then running clear as truth, small. "Percy's," she whispered, cupping her hands to drink. With daylight illuminating the cabin's sorry state, Sarah could see it wasn't beyond saving, unlike her marriage, it seemed. The thought brought fresh tears, but she blinked them back fierce. "Ain't got time for crying," she told herself, her mama's words echoing in her head. Sarah ventured out to explore the property, finding it bigger than she'd first reckoned. Nearly 2 acres of overgrown land, with what looked like it might have once been a vegetable garden out back. An old tool shed leaned precariously, and beyond that a chicken coop long abandoned. Her exploration was cut short by the rumble of a truck coming up the drive. For one foolish moment her heart leapt. "Jack!" she called, shielding her eyes against the morning sun. But it wasn't Jack's blue Ford that pulled up, kicking dust. It was a beat-up red pickup she'd never seen before. A man in overalls stepped out, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable as a cat in a rainstorm. "Morning, ma'am," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Name's Miller, Hank Miller. I own this property now." Sarah felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. "I don't understand," she managed, one hand finding the porch rail to steady herself. Miller twisted his hat in his hands. "Bought it from your husband yesterday, got the deed right here." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Said you folks was moving to Louisville for an apartment." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "He sold our land, our farm. The small 20-acre plot they'd been working for the past 3 years. Gone?" "Yes'm. Said y'all needed cash for a down payment on a city place." Miller looked genuinely confused now. "But when I drove by to check the fence line this morning, I saw smoke from the chimney here." Sarah's knees gave way then, and she sank onto the porch steps, the enormity of Jack's betrayal washing over her like floodwater. "He sold everything," she whispered. "Our farm, our furniture, and left me here." Miller's face went pale as milk. "Ma'am, he stammered, clearly at a loss. "How much?" Sarah asked, her voice hollow. "How much did he get for our farm?" $38,000, Miller admitted. It was a fair price. $38,000. The number echoed in Sarah's head like a church bell. Enough for a fresh start. Enough to raise their baby proper. All gone with Jack. "Does the name Rebecca Winters mean anything to you?" Miller asked suddenly, looking uncomfortable. Sarah's head snapped up. "Rebecca, my friend Rebecca," Miller nodded slowly. "Blonde lady, real pretty? She was with your husband when he signed the papers. called her his fiancée. The world went silent around Sarah then, like someone had stuffed cotton in her ears. Rebecca, her closest friend since high school, the woman she'd invited for Sunday dinners countless times, the one who'd helped plan her baby shower just last month. She said they was heading to Nashville, Miller continued, unaware he was driving the knife deeper. Said they had dreams bigger than this county could. Hold! Something broke inside Sarah then. Not her heart, which was already shattered, but her innocence. The belief that good things happen to good people, that love was enough, that friendship was sacred. Mr. Miller, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Do you aim to throw me out now? The question seemed to shock him. Throw out a woman in your condition? What kind of man you take me for? He shifted uncomfortably. Tell you what, you can stay in this old cabin. It ain't much, but it's shelter. I was gonna tear it down anyway. You can have it rent-free till your baby comes. After that, we'll work something out. It was charity, plain and simple, but Sarah was in no position to refuse it. Thank you, she managed. After Miller left, Sarah sat on those porch steps for what seemed like hours, one hand on her belly, the other clutching the locket Jack had given her on their first anniversary. Inside was a picture of them, smiling, young, full of dreams. With trembling fingers, she yanked it from her neck, breaking the chain. For a moment, she thought about flinging it into the woods, but something stopped her. Instead, she tucked it into her pocket, not for sentiment's sake, but as a reminder of how quickly happiness could turn to ashes in your mouth. As evening fell, Sarah forced herself back into the cabin. The broken stove mocked her from the corner. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. In her pocketbook was the $20 Jack had left. All that remained of her former life. We still got to eat, she told her unborn child, feeling a kick in response. Outside, she gathered sticks and built a small fire in what was left of the yard's fire pit. From her pocketbook, she pulled out the last thing she had, a small bag of cornmeal she'd tucked in there yesterday, planning to make Jack's favorite cornbread for supper. Ain't that a cruel joke, she murmured, mixing the meal with water from the well. As the rough johnny cake cooked on a flat rock by the fire, Sarah made herself a solemn promise. I'm gonna build us back up, little one, and when I do, ain't nobody, especially no man, ever gonna have the power to tear us down again. The stars appeared one by one in the Kentucky sky, bearing witness to her vow. And somewhere in Nashville, Jack Thompson was spending her money, loving her friend, and had no idea of the reckoning that would someday come. 3 days passed slower than molasses in January. 3 days of Sarah Thompson sleeping on that hard, wooden floor, her pregnant body protesting with every turn. 3 days of johnny cakes by the fire pit and water from the well. 3 days of crying till there weren't no tears left, just a hollow aching where her heart used to be. On the 4th morning, Sarah woke with the sun, her back stiff as an old board. But something had changed inside her, like the turning of a season, that quiet shift that happens when winter finally gives way to spring. We can't keep living like this, she told her unborn child, her hand resting on the swell of her belly. Your daddy and that snake Rebecca may have taken everything else, but they ain't taken our dignity too. Sarah struggled to her feet, ignoring the dizziness that came from too little food. Outside, the August sun was already blazing hot, promising another scorcher. She made her way to the old tool shed, praying there might be something useful inside. The door protested with a screech of rusty hinges, but opened to reveal a jumble of forgotten items. An old broom with half its bristles missing, a shovel with a cracked handle, and there in the corner, something that made Sarah's breath catch, an ancient metal wash basin. Thank you, Lord, she whispered, dragging it out into the sunlight. With the basin filled from the well, Sarah stripped down to her slip and washed herself as best she could, the cool water a blessed relief against her skin. She washed her dress too, hanging it on a branch to dry while she sat in her slip, enjoying the simple pleasure of being clean again. As her dress dried in the sun, Sarah took stock of her situation. $20 to her name, no car, no phone. The nearest neighbor, at least that she could see, a good 2 miles down the road, the baby due in less than 2 months. Gotta make a plan, she murmured, the words carrying on the hot summer breeze. Before Jack, Sarah had made a modest living selling homemade treats at the farmer's market in town. Her brownies and cookies were famous in 3 counties, folks driving miles just to get a taste of a peach cobbler or chocolate fudge cake. That's it, she said, the idea taking shape. I'll bake, sell at the market like before. Reality crashed down quick as thunder after lightning. No oven, no ingredients, no way to get to town. Sarah's eyes fell on the fire pit where she'd been, cooking her meager meals, then to the broken stove in the cabin, then back to the fire. Where there's a will, she said, her mama's favorite saying coming to mind, there's a way. With newfound determination, Sarah set about cleaning the fire pit properly, arranging stones in a circle, building it up. From the shed, she dragged out an old grate that might have once belonged to a grill and set it atop the stones. If pioneer women could bake in hearths and over open flames, she told herself, then so can I. But ingredients remained a problem. Sarah emptied her pocketbook onto the porch steps. $20. Not much, but enough for flour, sugar, and butter if she was careful. Just need to get to town, she murmured, eyeing the long dirt road stretching out before the property. Sarah had just pulled her now dry dress back on when she heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. Her heart jumped to her throat, not with hope this time, but with wariness. She'd learned her lesson about hope. A battered station wagon pulled up, driven by a grey-haired woman with kind eyes and a face lined with years of Kentucky sun. Sarah recognized her immediately. "Mrs. Betty," she called, hardly believing her. Eyes Betty Mason had been a regular customer at the farmer's market, always buying Sarah's pecan squares for her husband. Said they reminded him of his mama's, she'd told Sarah once. "Lord have mercy, child. What are you doing out here?" Betty called, shutting off the engine and climbing out. She took in Sarah's pregnant state with widening eyes. "I was just passing by on my way to the Thompson farm and saw smoke from your fire. Thought maybe kids were messing around out here." The mention of the Thompson name, her name still, though it felt like poison on her tongue now, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Jack left me," she said simply, too tired for pride or pretense. "Sold our farm to Mr. Miller. Took everything. Left me here with nothing but this old cabin and $20. Betty's face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, and finally a fierce determination that reminded Sarah of her own mama. That no good. Betty stopped herself, clearly minding her language. "Where's he gone to?" "Nashville, with my friend Rebecca." The words tasted bitter as green persimmons. Betty's hand flew to her mouth. "That Winters girl? The one always hanging around your place?" Sarah nodded, the betrayal still fresh as an open wound. Betty looked from the cabin to the makeshift fire pit, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You've been out here alone for how long?" 4 days, Sarah admitted. "Jesus, Mary and Joseph," Betty muttered, then crossed herself quickly. "Get in the car, honey, you're coming home with me." For a moment, Sarah was tempted. A real bed, a proper meal, but something held her back, the same something that had stopped her from flinging Jack's locket into the woods. "I can't," she said softly. "This is my home now, at least till the baby comes. Mr. Miller's letting me stay." Betty looked like she might argue, but something in Sarah's face must have stopped her. Instead, she asked, "What do you need then? And don't you dare say nothing. The good Lord helps those who help themselves, but he also expects his children to help each other." Sarah swallowed hard. "I need to get to town, buy some flour and sugar. I was thinking I could start baking again, selling at the market like before." Betty's eyes traveled to the fire pit, understanding what Sarah was planning. "You aim to bake over an open fire in your condition?" "Got no choice," Sarah said simply. Betty was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You always did have grit, girl. More than most." She reached into her purse, pulled out a notepad, and scribbled something. "My number, and my address. You need anything at all, you call. Pay phone at Miller's store 5 miles down the road." Sarah took the paper, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you. And as for work," Betty continued, "my sister's husband owns Hillside Farm. They need help in the kitchen. The cook just quit, run off with some traveling salesman." She shook her head at the irony. "It ain't glamorous work, but it pays fair." "I'd be grateful for any work," Sarah said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "I'll pick you up tomorrow morning, 7 sharp," Betty said firmly. "And I'm bringing groceries. Don't argue with me, Sarah Thompson. My Harold always said I was stubborner than a mule with a toothache." For the first time in days, something like a smile touched Sarah's lips. "Thank you, Mrs. Betty." As the station wagon disappeared down the dirt road, Sarah stood in the yard, the note clutched in her hand like a lifeline. The baby kicked, strong and insistent. "See that?" she whispered, patting her belly. "We ain't alone after all, and your mama's gonna make sure we never go hungry again." Sarah looked at the broken stove in the cabin, the symbol of Jack's cruelty, and made a silent vow. Someday that stove would be just a memory, and she would be more than just Jack Thompson's abandoned wife. True to her word, Mrs. Betty's station wagon rattled up the dirt drive at 7 sharp the next morning. Sarah was waiting on the porch, her hair combed back neat as she could get it without a proper brush, her one dress freshly washed in the basin and dried overnight. "Morning, child," Betty called, handing over a paper bag as soon as Sarah climbed in. "Eat that, you're wasting away before my very eyes." Inside the bag was a biscuit sandwich with ham and egg that made Sarah's mouth water something fierce. She tried to eat slow and dignified, but hunger got the better of her manners. "Thank you," she managed between bites, embarrassed at how desperate she must look. Betty just nodded, her eyes on the road. "Brought you some things," she said, nodding to the back seat where Sarah spotted grocery bags and what looked like an old blanket. "Just basics: flour, sugar, eggs, some canned goods, a pillow and blanket for that floor you've been sleeping on." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. "Mrs. Betty, I can't accept—" "You stop right there," Betty interrupted, her voice firm as oak. "When my Harold passed 5 years back, half this county showed up with food and comfort. That's what folks do around here. They help each other through the hard times." Sarah swallowed around the lump in her throat. "I'll pay you back every penny." "I know you will," Betty said simply. "That's why I'm doing it." The drive to Hillside Farm took near 30 minutes, most of it on winding back roads that made Sarah's already queasy stomach roll. By the time they pulled up to the sprawling farmhouse with its red barn and neat white fences, she was clutching the door handle, breathing deep to settle her insides. "Are you all right there?" Betty asked, concern in her eyes. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. The truth was she felt awful, tired to her bones, her back aching something terrible, and hunger gnawing at her despite the breakfast. But she couldn't afford to be anything but all right today. "Mr. Thompson ain't an easy man to work for," Betty warned as they walked toward the kitchen entrance. "Pays fair, like I said, but he expects his money's worth. His daddy built this place from nothing, and he never lets anyone forget it." "I ain't afraid of hard work," Sarah said, squaring her shoulders. Betty gave her a sideways glance. "It ain't the work I'm worried about. It's you working in your condition." Before Sarah could respond, they were at the kitchen door. The sounds and smells hit her at once. Bacon frying, coffee percolating, men's voices calling out orders. The farmhand's breakfast was in full swing. The kitchen was bigger than Sarah's whole cabin, gleaming with copper pots and white tile. A harried-looking young girl was trying to manage several skillets at once, while a tall, stern man with iron-gray hair watched with obvious disapproval. "You're burning the bacon again, girl," he barked, making the girl jump and nearly drop her spatula. "Walter," Betty called, her voice cheerful. "Brought you someone who can actually cook, unlike that poor child you got burning everything." Mr. Thompson turned, his sharp eyes taking in Sarah's pregnant form with obvious skepticism. "This is your idea of kitchen help, Betty? She looks about ready to deliver right on my clean floor." Sarah felt her cheeks burning, but held his gaze. "I'm not due for 2 months, sir, and I can cook better than most with 2 good hands and a proper stove." Something in her tone must have caught his attention, because his eyebrows rose slightly. "That? So," he asked, "what can you make beside burnt bacon?" Sarah thought of her days at the farmer's market, of the lines that would form for her baked goods. "Anything you want, Mr. Thompson. Biscuits light enough to float, cornbread that'll make you weep, pies, cakes, and cookies that folks used to. Drive counties over to buy at the Dixon market." Mr. Thompson's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Dixon market, you say? You wouldn't be the one made those chocolate things with the pecans?" "Brownies," Sarah supplied. "Yes, sir, that was me." "Huh." Mr. Thompson looked her up and down again, less dismissive this time. "My boy used to bring those home sometimes, not half bad. It wasn't exactly high praise, but Sarah would take it. Tell you what," he said finally. "Kitchen helps $3 an hour. Breakfast and lunch for the hands, dinner for my family. 6 days a week, Sundays off. You start now, those men need to be fed before they hit the fields." It was barely minimum wage, but Sarah wasn't in a position to negotiate. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," he warned. "You burn my bacon, you're out." After he left, Betty squeezed Sarah's shoulder. "Told you, not easy but fair." Sarah looked around the kitchen at the frightened girl still struggling with the skillets. "I can manage. I'll be back at 6 to drive you home," Betty said. "Unless Walter offers." His wife usually does. When Betty was gone, Sarah rolled up her sleeves and approached the girl, who couldn't have been more than 16. "I'm Sarah," she said gently. "What's your name?" "Amy," the girl replied, relief washing over her face. Thank God you're here. I can't cook nothing but cereal. Sarah took the spatula from her trembling hand. Let me show you a trick or two. By noon, Sarah had served breakfast to 20 farmhands, prepared lunch of ham sandwiches and potato salad, and started bread dough for dinner. Her back screamed with every movement, her swollen feet barely fitting in her shoes anymore. But the kitchen was clean. The men were fed, and Mr. Thompson had nodded just once when he came through to inspect. It wasn't until the afternoon lull that Sarah remembered what she'd brought with her. A small cake she'd somehow managed to bake over her fire pit the previous evening, using the few ingredients she'd had. It wasn't much, just a simple yellow cake with no frosting, but it was her proof, her way of showing she could deliver what she promised. "Mr. Thompson," she called, catching him as he passed through. "I brought this. Made it myself yesterday." He eyed the humble cake skeptically, but took the offered slice. His eyebrows shot up after the first bite. "You made this?" he asked. "Where?" "Betty said you're living in that old shack on Miller's property." "Over a fire pit, sir," Sarah admitted. "Don't have a proper stove yet." Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "Over a fire? And still this good? Imagine what I could do with your oven," Sarah said, allowing herself a small smile. Mr. Thompson handed her back the empty plate. "My wife's partial to lemon desserts," he said, which Sarah understood was as close to a compliment and a challenge as she was likely to get. "I'll remember that, sir." That evening, Betty drove her home, talking all the way about how the farmhands had raved about lunch, how Amy was singing Sarah's praises, how she'd never seen Walter Thompson so close to impressed. Sarah barely heard her, exhaustion washing over her in waves. Her body ached from standing all day, from lifting heavy pots, from the weight of the child growing inside her. But for the first time in days, her belly was full, and in her pocket was something precious. Her first day's pay, $24 in cash. As Betty's car disappeared down the dirt road, Sarah sank onto the porch steps, too tired to even make it inside. The sun was setting over the Kentucky hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, a whippoorwill called. "We did it," she whispered to her unborn child. First day down. The baby kicked in response, a strong little foot or fist pressing against her side. Sarah placed her hand there, feeling the movement beneath her palm. "One day at a time," she promised. "That's how we'll build our life back. One day at a time." From inside the cabin, the broken stove waited in silence, a reminder of all she'd lost. But on the porch, counting her first day's wages and feeling her baby move beneath her heart, Sarah Thompson found something she thought Jack had taken forever. Hope? It was just a tiny flame, flickering and fragile, but it was hers, and this time she wouldn't let anyone blow it out. For 6 weeks, Sarah Thompson's life fell into a rhythm as steady as her heartbeat. Up at dawn, cooking at Hillside, farm till dusk, then home to that empty cabin where she'd collapse bone-tired on her pallet of blankets. The money she earned went straight into an old coffee can buried under the floorboards, her savings for when the baby came, and she couldn't work. By October, Sarah's belly was so big she could hardly see her own feet. The baby was due any day now, and fear gnawed at her insides worse than hunger ever had. What would she do when her time came? The nearest hospital was 30 miles away in Lexington, and she still had no car, no phone. "Don't you worry," Mrs. Betty assured her. "Half the babies in this county were born at home with just a midwife. My sister Martha knows Mrs. Johnson, the nurse midwife. She already said she'd come when your time's near." But Sarah still worried, especially when the autumn rains came, turning the dirt road to mud, making it near impossible for anyone to reach her if trouble came. It was on just such a rainy night in mid-October when Sarah first felt the pains. They started low in her back, wrapping around like a belt, pulling tighter and tighter. She'd been baking at Mrs. Martha's. Betty's sister, who owned the bakery in town, had taken a shine to Sarah, letting her use the ovens after hours to bake goods she could sell. Just a way to make extra, Sarah had explained to Mrs. Betty, not wanting her to think she was ungrateful for the job at Hillside. For when the baby comes, Mrs. Martha had been more than kind, even offering to sell Sarah's treats in her own bakery. "Your peach cobbler puts mine to shame," she'd admitted. "No sense pretending otherwise." That rainy night, Sarah was just pulling a batch of her famous brownies from the oven when the first pain hit, making her gasp and nearly drop the hot pan. "You all right, honey?" Mrs. Martha asked, looking up from where she was cleaning the counters. "Just a twinge," Sarah lied, not wanting to cause a fuss. But 20 minutes later, when another pain came stronger than the first, She couldn't hide her wince. Mrs. Martha was at her side in an instant. "That ain't no twinge. That's a contraction. If I ever saw one. How far apart they been coming?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "That's only the second one." "Well, sit yourself down and let's time the next one," Mrs. Martha said firmly. The next pain came 18 minutes later, then the next 12 minutes after that. By 9 o'clock, they were 8 minutes apart and strong enough to take Sarah's breath away. "That's it," Mrs. Martha declared. "You're staying here tonight. No way you're going back to that cabin. I'm calling Betty and she's calling Mrs. Johnson." Sarah tried to protest, but another contraction hit, and this time she couldn't hold back a cry of pain. Mrs. Martha just gave her a look that said, matter was settled. The next few hours passed in a blur of intensifying pain. Mrs. Betty arrived with Mrs. Johnson, a calm, capable woman with grey-streaked hair and hands that seemed to know exactly where to press to ease Sarah's discomfort. "First babies usually take their time," Mrs. Johnson assured her. "We've got plenty of hours to go yet." But Sarah's baby had other ideas. By midnight, the contractions were coming every 3 minutes, each one feeling like it might split her in two. "This one's in a hurry," Mrs. Johnson said, checking Sarah's progress. "Won't be long now." Outside, thunder crashed and lightning split the sky. The storm had intensified, matching Sarah's labor pain for pain, roar for roar. "Jack should be here," Sarah cried during one particularly vicious contraction, immediately hating herself for the weakness. "I don't mean that. I don't want him here. I just—" "Hush now," Mrs. Betty soothed, wiping Sarah's forehead with a cool cloth. "We know what you mean, but you're stronger than Jack Thompson ever was. You hear me? You're doing this all on your own, and you're doing it beautifully." At 2:17 in the morning, with rain lashing the windows and thunder shaking the old bakery's foundations, Sarah Thompson gave birth to a son. His angry cry pierced the night, strong and determined as his mama. "Look at you," Mrs. Johnson said, placing the squalling infant on Sarah's chest. "A perfect little boy." Sarah stared down at her son through tears of exhaustion and wonder. He had a shock of dark hair and eyes that, even in those first moments, seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. "Ethan," she whispered, the name coming to her unbidden. "His name is Ethan." For a few precious hours, Sarah allowed herself to simply be a new mother, marveling at her son's tiny fingers and toes, at the perfect bow of his lips, at the strength in his grip when he wrapped his hand around her finger. But reality came calling with the dawn, as realities so often do. "I hate to bring this up now," Mrs. Martha said gently as she brought Sarah some breakfast in bed, "but Mr. Miller came by yesterday, said he needs to start charging you rent for that cabin, $20 a week." Sarah's heart sank. She'd been saving every penny, but between supplies for her baking and putting aside for the baby, she barely had $100 to her name. "When?" she asked, her voice small. "Starting next week," Mrs. Martha said, her kind face troubled. "I told him you were about to have the baby, but he said business is business." Sarah looked down at Ethan, nursing contentedly at her breast, unaware of the challenges waiting for him in the world. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll figure something out." Mrs. Betty appeared in the doorway, her face thunderous. "That Miller's got the compassion of a rattlesnake," she fumed. "Asking for rent the very week you've given birth." "It's his property," Sarah said, trying to be fair despite her fear. "He's been generous letting me stay this long without paying." "You'll stay here with me," Mrs. Martha insisted, "at least until you're back on your feet." But Sarah shook her head. "I can't impose. You've all done so much already." The truth was, Sarah needed her independence, needed to prove to herself, most of all, that she could make it on her own, that she and Ethan didn't need anyone's charity to survive. "I've got a plan," she said with more confidence than she felt. "My baking's been selling well at the market, and Mrs. Martha said she'd sell some in the bakery too. Between that and my work at Hillside, Walter Thompson won't hold your job forever," Mrs. Betty warned. "He's already hired someone else." The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. Without her job at Hillside, how would she pay rent and feed her baby? As if sensing his mother's distress, Ethan began to fuss. Sarah rocked him gently, her mind racing. "Then I'll just have to bake more," she said finally. "Sell more, find a way." The three older women exchanged glances, doubt clear in their eyes, but they didn't argue. The next day, still sore and exhausted from childbirth, Sarah Thompson returned to her cabin, her newborn son cradled in her arms. The old stove sat there, still broken, still mocking. "We're home, Ethan," she whispered. tears slipping down her cheeks as she looked around the bare, drafty cabin. It ain't much, but it's ours. Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak October sunshine filtered through the trees. Sarah stood in the doorway holding her son, facing a future uncertain as weather in the Kentucky hills. "I'll make you proud," she promised the tiny bundle in her arms. "Somehow, I'll build us a real home, a real life." The broken stove sat silent, watching and waiting to see if she'd make good on that promise. The Kentucky winter came early that year, harsh as Judgment Day. By November, the cabin's drafty walls let in cold that cut like a knife, and keeping little Ethan warm became Sarah's constant worry. The fire pit outside was useless now, with snow piling up, and the broken stove inside still sat mocking her, its cracked door hanging open like a crooked smile. "We just gotta hold on," Sarah whispered to her son, bundled against her chest in the one blanket she kept clean for him. Her own shoulders shook with cold as she stirred a pot of thin soup over the small kerosene heater Mrs. Betty had brought, barely enough to take the edge off the frost, but all she had. The rent payments to Mr. Miller were eating away at her small savings, faster than termites on soft pine. $20 a week might not sound like much to some, but to Sarah it was nearly half of what she managed to make, selling her baked goods at Mrs. Martha's bakery. "You could ask for an extension," Mrs. Betty suggested one afternoon, watching Sarah count out crumpled bills for Mr. Miller's weekly visit. "Just until spring comes and things get easier." Sarah shook her head, pride stiffening her spine. "No, ma'am. I pay my way, always have." The truth that Sarah wouldn't admit even to herself was that she was slowly starving. Every extra bite went to keeping up her milk for Ethan, and some days all she had was water and maybe a crust of bread. Her dresses hung loose now where they'd once stretched tight over her pregnant belly. "You're wasting away," Mrs. Martha scolded, when Sarah came to use the bakery's ovens. "Don't think I don't notice." "I'm fine," Sarah insisted, turning away to hide the dizzy spell that hit her as she bent to pull a tray of cookies from the oven. But she wasn't fine, and everyone could see it. It was Mrs. Johnson, the nurse midwife, who finally put her foot down. "Either you start taking better care of yourself," she said during a checkup on Ethan, "or I'll report you to social services. See how you like that?" The threat was like ice water in Sarah's veins. "You wouldn't." "Try me," Mrs. Johnson said, eyes soft but voice firm as oak. "That baby needs his mama healthy and strong, not half dead from hunger and cold." That night, after Ethan had finally fallen asleep, Sarah sat on the edge of her pallet, Jack's locket heavy in her hand. She'd kept it all these months, though she couldn't rightly say why. Maybe as a reminder of how quickly happiness could turn to ashes. Or maybe because selling it would feel too much like giving up the last piece of the girl she used to be. "What would you do, Mama?" she whispered into the darkness, thinking of her own mother, gone 5 years now. A strong woman who'd raised 3 kids alone after Sarah's daddy died in the mine collapse. Never took charity, never complained, just did what needed doing. The answer came clear as a bell. Her mama would have done whatever it took to survive. Pride was a luxury poor folks couldn't afford. The next day, Sarah did something she'd sworn she never would. She took some of her bacon to Hillside Farm, to Mr. Thompson. The kitchen was warm and busy, just like she remembered, though the woman at the stove was a stranger. She looked up with suspicious eyes when Sarah entered. "Mr. Thompson around?" Sarah asked, holding Ethan close with one arm, a basket of her best cookies in the other. "Office," the woman said shortly, turning back to her pots. Sarah found him in the small room off the dining area, poring over account books. He looked up, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "Heard you had the baby," he said by way of greeting, eyes going to the bundle against her chest. "Yes, sir. This is Ethan." Sarah shifted so he could see the infant's face, peaceful in sleep. Mr. Thompson nodded once, then waited, clearly wondering why she was there. Sarah swallowed her pride like a bitter pill. "Sir, I've brought these for you and your family, as a thank you for the work you gave me before." She set the basket on his desk. Mr. Thompson lifted the cloth, the smell of fresh-baked pecan sandies and chocolate chips wafting up. His eyebrows rose slightly. "Still bacon, I see." "Yes, sir. At Mrs. Martha's bakery now. She lets me use her ovens after hours." Mr. Thompson studied her face. "You're looking mighty thin, girl." Sarah didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. After a long moment, he sighed. "Farmhand's been complaining about the food since you left. New cook can't bake worth a damn." Hope flared in Sarah's chest, but she kept her face neutral. "Is that so? Don't suppose you'd consider baking for us again? Just desserts, mind, 3 times a week. Deliver 'em fresh in the morning." I could do that, Sarah said carefully, for the right price. Mr. Thompson's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Got some backbone now, I see. $5 a batch. That's more than fair. It was, and they both knew it. Yes, sir, thank you, sir. As she turned to leave, he called after her. That's a fine-looking boy. Got his mama's determination in his eyes. It wasn't much as compliments go, but coming from Walter Thompson, it might as well have been poetry. That small victory was just the beginning. Word spread about the woman with the magic touch for sweets, and soon Sarah was baking for half the county's special occasions. Birthday cakes, wedding pies, Christmas cookies. Folks would wait weeks for her creations. The farmhands at Hillside raved so much about her desserts that Mr. Thompson's workers started ordering from her too. Then the men at the sawmill. Then Mr. George at the general store asked if she'd supply his counter with fresh cookies each morning. Sell out before noon, he told her, counting out cash for her first delivery. Could double the order if you've got the time. And just like that, Sarah Thompson's little baking business began to grow, like seedlings after spring rain. Each sale meant a little more food on her table, a warmer blanket for Ethan, coal for the small heater that kept the worst of winter's bite at bay. By Christmas, she had enough to buy Ethan a proper crib and a tiny stuffed bear that he clutched in his sleep. By January, she'd saved enough to fix the cabin's worst leaks, and by February, when the first hints of spring teased the frozen ground, Sarah had a revelation. I don't need Jack, she told Ethan as he cooed up at her from his crib. I don't need anyone to save us. We're gonna save ourselves. The old stove watched from its corner, its broken door now covered with a clean dish towel, no longer a symbol of Sarah's abandonment, but a reminder of how far she'd come. That evening, Mr. Miller came for his rent as usual, but instead of just handing over the money, Sarah offered him a slice of fresh apple pie. My word, he said after the first bite, eyes widening. That's the best pie I've ever tasted. Sarah smiled, confidence blooming inside her like the first flowers of spring. Mr. Miller, she said, I'd like to discuss a business proposition with you. The old stove in the corner seemed to stand a little taller, as if it too could sense the change in the air, the shift from mere survival to something like hope. While Sarah's fortunes were slowly rising like good bread dough in a warm kitchen, Jack Thompson's life in Nashville was taking a different turn altogether. The money from selling the farm, their farm, had seemed like a fortune when he and Rebecca first arrived in Music City. They'd rented a fancy apartment downtown, bought new clothes and spent nights hopping from honky-tonk to honky-tonk like they were country royalty. This is living, Jack would say, another whiskey in his hand, Rebecca hanging on his arm like Spanish moss on a live oak. That farm was just holding us back. For a while it seemed like the good times would never end. Rebecca loved the attention her pretty face got her in Nashville, and Jack loved being the man with money to burn. Neither one of them thought much about Sarah, left behind with nothing but an old stove and a baby on the way. But money, like most things that come too easy, has a way of slipping through fingers faster than creek water. By the time winter set in, the same bitter winter that had Sarah counting pennies for coal, Jack was counting his last $100 bills. We need to be more careful, he told Rebecca one morning, watching her apply makeup for yet another day of shopping. Maybe look for jobs. Rebecca's laugh was cold as the frost on their windows. Jobs. I didn't come to Nashville to wait tables, Jack. I came for the good life you promised me. The argument that followed was their first, but not their last. As January turned to February and their bank account dwindled to nearly nothing, the fights got worse. The whiskey bottle became Jack's closest companion, and Rebecca's eyes started wandering to other men with fuller wallets and bigger promises. You think I don't see you flirting with that record producer? Jack shouted one night, drunk and mean as a wounded coyote. You think I'm blind? Maybe I want someone who isn't a disappointment. Rebecca shot back, her pretty face twisted with contempt. Someone who can keep his promises. The words hit harder than any fist could have. Somewhere deep inside, past the whiskey haze and the anger, Jack knew she was right. He was a disappointment, had been all his life. Disappointment to his daddy, who wanted a son to take over the family business. Disappointment to Sarah, who'd believed in him when no one else would. And now disappointment to Rebecca, who was quickly realizing the golden ticket she thought she'd snagged was nothing but fool's gold. March came in like a lion, bringing with it the final blow. Jack woke one morning with a pounding headache to find Rebecca gone, along with his truck, the last of their cash, and even the watch his granddaddy had left him. All she left was a note. Found someone who isn't a loser. Don't try to find me. Just like that, everything Jack had sacrificed for, had abandoned Sarah and his unborn child for, vanished like morning mist under a hot sun. The apartment went next. Evicted with nowhere to go, Jack found himself on the streets of Nashville, a city that suddenly seemed as cold and uncaring as Rebecca's final glance. Pride kept him from calling home to Kentucky at first. Pride and shame, a powerful combination that can make a man do foolish things, like selling his wedding ring for a bottle of cheap bourbon, like sleeping under a bridge when the shelters were full, like taking odd jobs that paid just enough for his next drink, but never enough to escape the hole he'd dug himself into. Rock bottom is what they call it in those church meetings Jack started attending, not out of any religious feeling, but because they served hot coffee and sometimes sandwiches. Rock bottom was waking up one April morning behind a dumpster, covered in his own sick, without even knowing how he'd gotten there. "You can't keep going like this, son," the old preacher told him after finding him in that sorry state. "The Lord's got better plans for you, if you'd just let him in." Jack wasn't sure about the Lord, but he was sure about one thing. He couldn't keep falling. There was nowhere left to fall to. That day, for the first time since leaving Kentucky, Jack Thompson didn't take a drink. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. His hands shaking so bad, he could barely hold the coffee cup the mission gave him. The next day was worse. Sweats and chills and seeing things that weren't there. But he stayed sober. One day turned to two, then a week, then a month. He found work sweeping floors at a barbershop, then moving up to shampooing customers. The owner, Mr. Davis, had been down his own rough road once and saw something worth saving in Jack's haunted eyes. "Everyone deserves a second chance," Mr. Davis said, handing Jack his first real paycheck in months. "Even folks who've done wrong." With a place to sleep in the room above the barbershop and regular meals, Jack's mind began to clear, like a pond, after a storm settles. And with that clarity came the memories and the guilt. Sarah, heavy with his child, her face when he'd driven away, leaving her with nothing but $20 and a broken stove. What kind of man does that to the woman he once loved enough to marry? What kind of father abandons his own flesh and blood before they even draw their first breath? "I need to make it right," he told Mr. Davis one evening as they closed up shop. "I need to go back to Kentucky." "You sure that's wise?" the older man asked. "Some bridges once burned can't never be rebuilt." "I know," Jack admitted. "I don't expect forgiveness, don't deserve it. But I need to try. Need to at least see my child know they're all right." It took 3 more months of saving every penny, of living on beans and cornbread, of working extra hours sweeping hair and shining shoes, before Jack had enough for a bus ticket back to Kentucky. By then, it was nearly a year since he'd left. Sarah at that broken-down cabin. The bus rolled into Lexington on a sweltering June morning, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer above the pavement like water. Jack stepped off with nothing but a small duffel bag containing everything he now owned in the world. The farther the taxi took him from the city, the more the knot in his stomach tightened. Fields and farms rolled by outside the window, so similar to the land he'd once owned, had once worked alongside Sarah, planning their future, dreaming their dreams. "Pull over here," he told the driver when they reached the turnoff to Miller's property. Some things a man needs to face on foot, with time to gather his thoughts and courage. The walk down that dusty road seemed both endless and too short. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. What would he find? Was Sarah even still there? Had his child, a son or daughter he didn't even know, been born healthy? Would Sarah even speak to him, or would she slam the door? In his face, he wouldn't blame her if she did. As he rounded the final bend in the road, Jack Thompson stopped dead in his tracks, not believing his eyes. Where the broken-down cabin had stood was now a neat little house with a fresh coat of white paint. Flower boxes hung from the windows, bursting with color. A hand-painted sign by the driveway read, "Sarah's Homemade Sweets, Orders Welcome." And there on the porch, in a rocking chair, sat Sarah. She was thinner than he remembered, her face more angular, but somehow more beautiful too. Like hardship had carved away everything unnecessary, leaving only strength behind. In her lap sat a dark-haired toddler, their son, laughing as she bounced him on her knee. Jack's legs gave out then, and he fell to his knees right there in the dusty road, tears cutting tracks down his weathered face. Too late, much too late, he understood what he'd thrown away. The transformation of Sarah Thompson's life didn't happen overnight. It came in small steps, each one built on sweat and determination, like stones laid one by one to form a path out. To have darkness, It started with that business proposition to Mr. Miller on the February evening when she'd offered him a slice of apple pie along with his rent money. What kind of proposition? He'd asked, fork halfway to his mouth for another bite. I want to buy this land, Sarah had said, the words coming out stronger than she felt inside. Not right away, I ain't got that kind of money yet, but maybe we could work out a rent-to-own arrangement. Mr. Miller had stared at her like she'd started speaking in tongues. Buy it? With what? Begging your pardon, ma'am, but you can barely make rent as it is. My baking business is growing, Sarah had explained, chin held high despite the doubt in his eyes. I've got regular orders now from Hillside Farm, the general store, and Mrs. Martha's bakery, but I need a proper place to work, a real kitchen. After much negotiating that left Sarah's nerves frayed as an old rope, they'd struck a deal. Sarah would continue paying her weekly rent, but half would go toward eventually owning the property. Mr. Miller would help her fix up the cabin proper, starting with the plumbing and electric. And I want first dibs on whatever you're baking, he'd added with a smile that showed he was half joking, but half serious too. My wife says your pies. Remind her of her mama's. By March, the cabin had running water and electric lights for the first time. By April, Mr. Miller and some men from church had built Sarah a proper kitchen addition, complete with countertops and cabinets salvaged from a remodel in town. But the crowning glory, the thing that made Sarah weep with joy when she saw it, was the brand new oven they'd installed, gleaming white and perfect, with twice the capacity of a regular home model. This is too much, she'd protested when she saw it. Ethan balanced on her hip, his little hands reaching toward the shiny new appliance. Consider it an investment, Mr. Miller had said with a wink. My wife's got all her friends ordering your strawberry shortcake now. We aim to keep you in business. The orders that had been steady now became a flood. Word spread throughout the county about Sarah's baked goods, how her pie crusts were flaky as fresh snow, how her cakes stayed moist for days, how her cookies had just the right balance of crisp and chew, but it was her brownies that put Sarah Thompson on the map. Folks said they were magic, the perfect crisp top giving way to a scent of fudgy as sin itself. People started driving from 3 counties over just to get a batch. Mr. George from the general store doubled his standing order, then tripled it. Can't keep 'em in stock, he told Sarah as he paid her. Folks are asking for 'em by name now. Sarah's brownies, they call 'em. That was when the idea struck. A name, a brand. Not just baking for other folks to sell, but her own label, her own creation. Sarah's Homemade Sweets, she decided, the name feeling right as rain on her tongue. With borrowed paint and a steady hand, she made a sign for the front of the cabin and another for her table at the weekend market. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Her start. As spring turned to summer, Sarah hired her first helper, Amy, the same girl who'd been struggling in Hillside Farm's kitchen when Sarah first arrived. Now 16 and needing summer work, Amy took to baking like she was born to it, her once clumsy hands suddenly confident with a rolling pin or pastry bag. You got a gift for this, Sarah told her one afternoon as they worked side by side, the kitchen smelling of vanilla and cinnamon. A natural touch. Amy had blushed at the praise. Learned from the best, she'd said, and Sarah had felt a strange warm glow in her chest. Pride, but different from any she'd felt before. Pride in someone. Elsie's growth in being part of it. By July, they'd outgrown the kitchen addition. Orders were piled so high that Sarah was baking nearly round the clock, sleeping in catnaps when Ethan did, her hands permanently smudged with flour and sugar. You need a bigger place, Mrs. Betty said one day, watching Sarah try to juggle 3 different orders at once. A proper bakery. That takes money, Sarah had replied, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. More than I got saved up. Mrs. Betty had gotten a look then, the kind that meant wheels were turning. Walter Thompson's got that old storage building in town, the one next to the feed store. Been empty for years. Betty'd rent it cheap if someone fixed it up. Sarah had shaken her head. I ain't asking that man for nothing. But Mrs. Betty was not a woman easily deterred. Without telling Sarah, she'd gone to Mr. Thompson herself. What she'd said to him, no one knew for sure. But 2 days later, he'd shown up at Sarah's cabin, hat in hand. Heard you might be in the market for a bigger place, he'd said, avoiding Sarah's eyes in a way that suggested Mrs. Betty had indeed given him an earful. Got that old building in town. Solid bones, but needs work. I can't afford. Sarah had begun, but he'd cut her off. Rent's $50 a month and I'll pay for materials if you handle the renovations. He'd finally met her gaze then. It's a business decision, plain and simple. This county needs a proper bakery, and my wife says your lemon cake is the best thing she's ever tasted. It had taken all summer and half of fall, with Sarah baking by day and renovating by night. But by October, 1 year after Ethan's birth, Sarah's homemade sweets had a real home in town. A proper bakery with a shop front, display cases, and a kitchen big enough for 3 ovens. The grand opening had been the talk of the county. Folks lined up down the block, eager to be among the first customers in the new shop. Sarah had hired a second helper by then. Rose, Mrs. Betty's niece, who'd just graduated high school and needed work. Between the 3 of them, Sarah creating recipes, Amy baking, and Rose handling the counter, the shop was an immediate success. By Christmas, they were shipping holiday gift baskets as far as Louisville and Lexington, and through it all, the old broken stove from the cabin sat in a corner of the new bakery kitchen, a reminder of where Sarah had started. She'd insisted on bringing it, though Amy and Rose had thought she was crazy. That old thing, Amy had asked, why not just junk it? Because, Sarah had explained, running her hand over its rusty surface, every time I look at it, I remember what I've overcome, what I've built from nothing. Now as she sat rocking Ethan on the porch of what was once a broken-down cabin, but was now a charming little house, her house, free and clear after Mr. Miller had decided to sell it to her outright, impressed by her business success, Sarah Thompson felt a peace she'd never known before. Her son was healthy and growing strong, her business was thriving, and the future stretched before them bright as sunrise over Kentucky hills. That's when she saw him, figure at the end of the drive, falling to his knees in the dust. Even at this distance, even after all this time, she'd know him anywhere. Jack Thompson, the man who'd left her with nothing but a broken stove and a baby on the way. The man whose cruelty had nearly broken her, but instead had forged her into someone stronger than she'd ever imagined she could be. Sarah's arms tightened around Ethan, her body suddenly tense as a drawn bow. What right did he have to come here now? Now when she'd finally built something good from the ashes of what he'd done. But as she watched him kneeling there, shoulders shaking with what could only be sobs, Sarah felt something unexpected stir inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginnings of something like it. The realization that Jack Thompson no longer had the power to hurt her, that she'd risen so far above the woman he'd abandoned that he was now looking up at her, literally and figuratively. "Who that, Mama?" Ethan asked, his little voice curious as he pointed toward the man in the road. Sarah took a deep breath, the scent of fresh-baked bread from the kitchen window filling her lungs. "That's someone from Mama's past, darling. Someone who's about to see just how strong your Mama really is." Sarah Thompson sat frozen on her porch rocker, Ethan warm and solid in her lap, as Jack slowly picked himself up from the dirt road. He stood there a moment, dusting off his knees, before taking hesitant steps toward the house she'd built from the ashes of his betrayal. "Mama?" Ethan asked again, his little voice pulling her back to the present. "Who that man?" Sarah smoothed, his dark curls so like her own. "Just wait here a minute, sugar," she said, settling him in the rocker. "Mama needs to talk to someone." She stepped off the porch just as Jack reached the edge of her yard. Up close, he looked both familiar and strange, thinner, older, the cockiness gone from his stance like air from a punctured tire. His eyes, once cold as January frost, now held something she'd never seen there before. Shame. "Sarah," he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. "Jack." Her voice was steady, surprising herself. "Didn't expect to see you again." He flinched like she'd slapped him, though her tone had been neutral as Switzerland. "I know. I didn't think you'd want to see me." "I don't." The words came out honest and clean, no bitterness clinging to them. Simply truth, like saying the sky is blue or water is wet. Jack's gaze drifted past her to the porch, where Ethan watched them with curious eyes. "Is that—" He couldn't finish, his voice breaking. "That's Ethan, my son." The emphasis was slight, but unmistakable. "He's beautiful," Jack whispered. "Looks just like you." "What do you want, Jack?" Sarah asked, crossing her arms. "Why are you here after all this time?" Jack's eyes dropped to the ground, unable to meet her steady gaze. "I came to apologize, to try to make things right." A laugh escaped Sarah then, sharp as breaking glass. "Make things right? You left me 7 months pregnant in a broken-down cabin with $20 to my name. You sold our farm out from under me. You ran off with my friend, and now what? You think you can just apologize and everything will be right as rain?" "No, I don't expect that," Jack said quickly. "I don't expect anything, Sarah. I needed to tell you I'm sorry." I needed to see with my own eyes that you and the baby were all right. No thanks to you, Sarah said, the first hint of anger coloring her words. Do you have any idea what it was like? Having a baby on my own during the worst storm of the year. Nearly starving myself so Ethan could have milk. Trying to bake over an open fire because that broken stove you left was useless. Each question hit Jack like a physical blow, making him flinch and shrink before her. I can't imagine, he admitted. What I did, there ain't no excuse for it. No, there ain't, Sarah agreed. So why are you really here, Jack? You get tired of the bright lights in Nashville? Rebecca finally figure out you ain't worth the trouble? The direct hit made Jack's face flush with shame. She left, he admitted. Took what was left of the money and ran off with some record producer. But that ain't why I'm here. I hit bottom, Sarah. Lost everything. Been living on the streets until a man at a barbershop gave me a chance. Part of Sarah, a small, mean part she wasn't proud of, felt satisfaction hearing this. The man who'd thrown her away like yesterday's garbage had gotten a taste of his own medicine. But the larger part of her, the part that had fought and clawed her way to success, felt nothing but a weary sort of pity. I'm sorry to hear that, she said, and meant it. Don't be, Jack said. I deserved worse than I got. His eyes traveled over the neat house, the sign for her business, the prosperity evident in every detail. You've done real well for yourself, better than I ever would have believed possible. No thanks to you, Sarah repeated, but the words held less bite this time. I know. That's what makes it all the more amazing. Jack's gaze returned to Ethan, a hunger in his eyes that Sarah recognized all too well. Would you let me meet him just once? I know I got no right to ask, but you're right, Sarah cut him off. You got no right. You may have helped make him, but that don't make you his daddy. A daddy's there for midnight feedings and first steps and fevers. A daddy don't walk away before his child even draws breath. Jack nodded, accepting her words, like a man accepting his sentence. I understand, I'll go. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. More sorry than words can say. He turned to leave, shoulders slumped in defeat when Sarah's voice stopped him. Wait. Jack turned back, hope flickering in his eyes like a candle guttering in the wind. You want forgiveness, Jack? Sarah asked. I don't deserve it, he answered. Honestly, no you don't. But forgiving you ain't about what you deserve, it's about what I need. Sarah took a deep breath, the years of anger and pain and struggle washing through her. I've been carrying the weight of what you did for too long. It's a burden I'm ready to set down. Jack stood very still, hardly daring to breathe. I forgive you, Sarah said, the words feeling like keys unlocking a door she hadn't realized was still closed inside her. Not for you, for me, for Ethan, so we can move forward without the shadow of your betrayal hanging over us. Tears filled Jack's eyes, spilling down his weathered cheeks. I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say, Sarah told him. My forgiving you don't mean I want you in our lives. You made your choice that day you drove away, now you got to live with it. I understand, Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. But, Sarah continued, surprising herself, if someday, not now but someday, Ethan asks about his father, I won't lie to him. And if he decides he wants to know you, then that'll be his choice to make. Hope bloomed on Jack's face, quickly tempered by understanding. That's more than fair, more than I deserve. It ain't about deserving, Sarah said. It's about doing right by my son. From the porch, Ethan called out, Mama, thirsty. Coming, sugar, Sarah called back. Then to Jack, I got to go. Of course, Jack said, taking a step back. Thank you, Sarah, for hearing me out. From everything. As Sarah turned to go back to her son, Jack called after her one more time. The bakery in town. That's yours too? Sarah nodded. Built it from scratch. No help from anyone but folks. Who believed in me? Pride shone in Jack's eyes then. Not for himself, but for her. I always knew you were special, Sarah. Even back when we first met. I just didn't know how special. Goodbye, Jack, Sarah said, neither harsh nor kind, simply final. As she watched him walk back down the dusty road, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. A weight she'd carried so long she'd almost forgotten it was there. The forgiveness she'd offered hadn't been for Jack's sake, but for her own. To finally truly be free of him and the pain he'd caused. Back on the porch, Sarah gathered Ethan into her arms, breathing in the sweet smell of his hair, feeling his little heart beat against her own. Who was that man, Mama? He asked again. Just someone who needed to learn a lesson, Sarah told him. Someone who thought he could break us but made us stronger instead. Ethan accepted this with the simple faith of childhood, already distracted by a butterfly floating past the porch. Sarah sat back in her rocker, watching her son point and laugh with delight at the world's small wonders. Inside, the old stove had been cleaned up and now served as a reminder rather than a burden, displayed prominently in her living room as a symbol of how far she'd come. Sarah thought of the bakery in town, of Amy and Rose waiting for her there tomorrow morning, of the orders piling up for the weekend market. She thought of Mr. Miller, who'd believed in her enough to give her a chance, and Mrs. Betty and Mrs. Martha, who'd shown her kindness when she needed it most. Most of all, she thought of herself, the woman she'd been when Jack left her, broken and afraid, compared to the woman she was now, strong, independent, successful, a mother and a businesswoman who'd built something from nothing but determination and heart. The sound of another vehicle coming up the drive pulled Sarah from her thoughts. This time it was Mr. Thompson's truck, Walter Thompson, not Jack, though the coincidence of their last names had confused folks more than once. "Evening, Sarah," he called, climbing out with a clipboard in hand. "Got that order for the bank. Luncheon tomorrow all sorted out? Thought I'd drop by since I was passing." Sarah smiled at the man who'd gone from demanding employer to business partner over the past year. "Come on up and have some lemonade, Mr. Thompson. I just made a fresh batch." As the evening settled soft around them, Sarah Thompson sat on her porch, her son playing at her feet, her future spread before her like a road leading to places she'd once only dreamed of. And somewhere in the gathering dusk, the ghost of who she'd been, that desperate, abandoned woman, finally faded away, leaving behind only the queen of her own destiny. 5 years passed like pages turning in a well-loved book. Ethan Thompson grew from toddler to schoolboy, his mama's determination burning bright in his dark eyes. Sarah's business blossomed from small-town bakery to regional sensation, her creations now shipped all across Kentucky and into neighboring states. Sarah's homemade sweets had become more than just a bakery. It was a proper factory now, with a staff of 12 women, most of whom had their own stories of hardship and perseverance. Sarah made a point of hiring those who needed a second chance, just as she'd once needed one herself. The old broken stove that Jack had once used to mock her now sat in a place of honor in the factory lobby, polished to a shine, but still bearing its battle scars, the cracked door, the missing knobs. Beside it, a small plaque told its story. From this humble beginning with nothing but determination and faith, Sarah's homemade sweets was born. Of Jack, there had been little sign since that day on her porch. Word around town was that he'd found work at a garage in Lexington, was staying sober, living quiet. Every Christmas, a card would arrive for Ethan with $20 tucked inside. Not much, but consistent. Sarah never sent them back, tucking the money into a savings account for Ethan's future. It was on a crisp autumn morning that Sarah stood in her office overlooking the factory floor when a knock came at her door. Amy, now her production manager, vented with news that Mr. Miller had come to see her. "Got some news," the older man said after settling into a chair. "That property in town you were interested in? Wilson's selling it to a developer from Louisville for a shopping center." Sarah's heart sank, but Miller wasn't finished. "The developer wants your sweets as the anchor tenant. Says any shopping center in this county needs Sarah's homemade sweets to draw crowds." A smile spread across Sarah's face. "Is that so?" "Gets better," Miller said, eyes twinkling. "Guess who's representing the developer as their local property manager?" "Who?" "Jack Thompson." The name hung in the air between them, weighted with history. Later that afternoon, Sarah was testing a new recipe while Ethan did homework nearby when Amy appeared in the doorway. "There's someone here about the new retail location. Says he represents the developer." And there was Jack standing just behind Amy, his face a mask of shock as he took in the scene. Sarah in her kitchen, confident and successful. Ethan at the table, the son he barely knew. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, her voice calm as still water. "Amy said you're here about the new retail location." Jack seemed to gather himself with effort. "Yes, Mom. The developer I'm working with is very interested in having Sarah's homemade sweets as the anchor tenant." "I see," Sarah said. "And what makes your client think I'd be interested in expanding?" Jack's eyes flickered to Ethan, then back to her. "Your reputation, ma'am, your success speaks for itself." There was something in his tone, not quite envy, but recognition. Recognition of all she'd built without him, despite him. "Is this my daddy?" Ethan asked, suddenly making both adults freeze. Sarah met Jack's gaze, seeing the desperate hope there, the silent plea. She thought of the Christmas cards, the small attempts at responsibility. Too little, too late, and yet something. Yes, she said quietly. This is Jack Thompson. Ethan studied the man with curious eyes. You don't look like I thought you would. No? Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nope. You look ordinary. I thought you'd look special somehow. I'm very ordinary, Jack agreed. Your mama's the special one. In that moment, something shifted, an acknowledgement of truth that had been long in coming. Jack Thompson, who had once mocked Sarah as useless, who had abandoned her with nothing but a broken stove, now stood before her seeking her business, acknowledging her worth. Mr. Miller tells me you'll be managing the property, Sarah said, bringing the conversation back to business. Yes, ma'am, Jack confirmed. If you decide to lease with us, I'd be your landlord, I suppose. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Once he'd left her in a broken-down cabin with no electricity or running water. Now he hoped to collect rent from her thriving business. Sarah allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Well, Mr. Thompson, I'll need to see the terms. Of your offer, of course, but I might be interested if the price is right. As Jack fumbled with his briefcase, Sarah caught Ethan's eye and winked. Her son grinned back, somehow understanding that his mama had just won something important, even if he didn't quite know what. The broken stove that had once been a symbol of Sarah's abandonment now stood as a monument to her triumph. And Jack Thompson, the man who had once thought her worthless, now stood before her, humbled by the empire she had built from the ashes of his cruelty. If Sarah's journey has touched your heart and inspired you to persevere through your own challenges, please subscribe to our channel and activate notifications so you never miss another empowering story. And don't forget to click on the video appearing on your screen now. Mother's Day promise, girl marries poor guy who was secretly a millionaire. To continue experiencing these emotionally powerful stories that remind us of our capacity to overcome any obstacle life places in our path.